citizens of Puerto Rico a congressionally sanctioned process for them to assess their political status. I find this difficult to defend. As such, we are meeting today to consider a simple proposition that nonetheless elicits complex and emotional responses. The proposition is whether the people of Puerto Rico are satisfied with the status quo in terms of their political status, or whether they are not satisfied. I strongly believe that the legislation before us and the substitute that I will soon offer do not preordain any particular outcome. And let me stress that. There's a great deal of intrigue involving the issue of Puerto Rico political self-determination, and I, for one, choose not to be a part of it. I would now recognize the ranking member, the gentleman from Alaska, who has a long history on this issue, and I appreciate his work as well, and he is recognized for any opening remarks he wishes to make.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for holding this full committee markup on political status that will be Puerto Rico. The 105th Congress, many years ago, in fact 11 years ago, I sponsored the bill HR-856 to resolve the political status of Puerto Rico. After 3 committee hearings, including 2 in Puerto Rico, the committee passed the bill, and so did the House by 1 vote. That was 10 years ago, as I mentioned. Today we pressed to pass HR-900. And I understand that you will be offered an amendment in the nature of substitute. I joined with Congressman Fortuno in applauding this amendment. While the amended HR-900 is somewhat different from the bill I sponsored in 1997, it confirms to my basic goal, which is to enable the people of Puerto Rico to determine their status in a manner that is democratic and consistent with history, legal, and constitutional precedents. I want to congratulate my good friend Congressman Fortuno, the ranking member of the Subcommittee on Insular Affairs, the bill's main sponsor, Congressman Serrano for his hard work and dedicated efforts to give all Puerto Ricans a voice and a choice, which the legislation will do. Mr. Chairman, I think this is long overdue, as I mentioned before. I think it's time when this Congress acts. I think it's time for this total Congress to send a bill to the President to make sure the people of Puerto Rico have an opportunity to decide their own destiny. I yield back the balance of my time.
I recognize the Chairwoman of the Subcommittee on Insular Affairs for any comments she wishes to make.
As everyone here knows, I have been a supporter of H.R. 1230 and opposed to H.R. 900. My chief opposition comes from what I see, despite all of the good work, a process that's designed to eliminate Commonwealth, even if the people of Puerto Rico want it. And as a member of a status commission in my own district in the past, and knowing the difficulty in providing a balanced educational campaign, I also have concerns that most of the close to 4 million people living in Puerto Rico and the equal number living in other parts of the United States need to have a clear understanding of what the options are and how each choice has the potential to impact their lives by the time they're asked to vote before December of 2009.
The Chair recognizes the ranking member of the subcommittee, Mr. Fortuno.
Thank you. Today, this committee will vote on whether to initiate a process that could lead, once and for all, to the final resolution of Puerto Rico's century-old political status dilemma. Congress, and this committee specifically, have embarked on this road before. The issue of Puerto Rico's political status has been broached by this Congress in no fewer than 66 bills and resolutions on the House side, and no less than 27 in the Senate. Over 50 congressional hearings have been held on the subject, including 4 in the last 2 years. Yet, here we are, today, 109 years after the United States was granted sovereignty over Puerto Rico as a result of the Treaty of Paris, and 90 years after Puerto Ricans were conferred U.S. citizenship, still a disenfranchised group within our own nation. Granted, what we are about to vote on today is only a single small step, but it is a step that we need to take, and that we need to take now. With 130 bipartisan co-sponsors, including Chairman Nick Rahal, Ranking Member Don Young, and 20 other members of the committee, the bill before us would implement the self-determination process recommended by the 2005 report by the President's Task Force on Puerto Rico Status. Chairman Rahal will offer an amendment in the nature of a substitute that would implement, in a simplified manner, the purposes of H.R. 900. As Puerto Rico's sole representative in the U.S. Congress, I respectfully ask that you join me in supporting this amendment. As amended, H.R. 900 simply provides the people of Puerto Rico with the opportunity to choose between maintaining their current political status with the United States or opting for a constitutionally viable, permanent, non-territorial status in a congressionally sanctioned plebiscite. Contrary to what you are being told by others, that's it. Nothing more and nothing less. Fellow members, Puerto Rico has been a U.S. territory since 1898, longer than any other in our nation's history. We have been U.S. citizens since 1917. From the trenches of the Marne to the beaches of Normandy, from the Hanton River to the hills of Nam Dong, from the mountains of Tora Bora to the village of An Nazaria, thousands, I say thousands of Puerto Rico's best have valiantly fought in the defense of our nation. Many have paid the ultimate price, including 68 in our nation's current war against terror. Yet, these men and women who so gallantly were willing to serve and give up their lives in the defense of and values of liberty, justice, and democracy, for which our great nation stands for, were not even able to vote for the commander-in-chief. Perhaps the biggest irony of it all is that today will be my only opportunity to vote on this measure, which is, if enacted, as you can appreciate, would have a profound impact on my 4 million constituents. That is the biggest paradox of it all. Puerto Ricans are citizens of the greatest democracy in the history of mankind, yet we are unable to fully participate in this democracy that we so much admire and cherish. I know that every single member of this committee, on both sides, has been heavily lobbied by the governor's office, his countless consultants, and their opportune allies in the English-only movement. As they say, politics makes for strange bedfellows. But this should come as no surprise, as every time the congressional leadership, whether it be Republican or Democrat, makes any progress on bipartisan legislation to redeem America's promise of government by consent of the governed, they all team up to oppose equal rights for millions of U.S. citizens. My humble request to the members of this committee is that you simply read the chairman's substitute and reach your own conclusion. The question that we are asking the people of Puerto Rico is quite simple and to the point. Do you want to remain as you are, or do you want to move into something different? It does not get much simpler than that. As to what happens next, the fact is that the bill does not preclude Puerto Rico from taking any steps it deems necessary to implement the results of the plebiscite. These include drafting local legislation, entering into negotiations with Congress, or even calling for a constitutional convention that the governor so fervently defends now, but which he never, I repeat, never even mentioned when he served on this very committee in the 107th and 108th Congresses. My point is that it is hard to believe that anyone that sincerely wants to move this process forward could oppose the chairman's substitute, or HR-900 as originally introduced for that matter, in good faith. Chairman Rejo, Ranking Member Young, fellow members, what we have before us is a historic opportunity. We can either choose to look the other way, as some would want us to do, or live up to the times and take up the challenge. I sincerely hope this committee and this Congress will choose the latter. After 109 years under the U.S. flag and 90 years as U.S. citizens, Puerto Ricans deserve no less. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Further consideration of HR-900. Without objection, so ordered. I ask unanimous consent that the bill be considered read and open for amendment at any point. Without objection, is so ordered. I have an amendment in the nature of a substitute to HR-900. It is in the members' folders. And I recognize myself for 5 minutes to explain the amendment. Without objection, it is considered read and open to amendment at any point. Unlike the introduced version of HR-900, the substitute provides 2009, giving voters the option to vote to continue the current U.S. territorial status, the status quo, or for a constitutionally viable permanent non-territorial status. If a majority of the voters favor option 2, non-territorial status, the results of the plebiscite would be submitted to the President's Task Force on Puerto Rico's status to develop recommendations to the Congress. This is about as straightforward as you can get. However, since the substitute was circulated, there have been further discussions among interested members and their staffs. In this regard, I anticipate an amendment will be offered by the gentlelady from the Virgin Islands to include a constitutional convention as the body to make recommendations to Congress, rather than the President's task force, in the event that option 2 receives a majority of the votes in the plebiscite. That concludes my explanation. I'll recognize any member who wishes to comment on the substitute. The gentlelady from Virgin Islands, Donna.
Thank you. And what the outcome will be of today's hearing and what goes to the floor will be a product of that relationship. This amendment has made a valiant and truly good faith effort to bring the differing approaches together. After many meetings within the committee and with leadership, I'm still afraid that many of us remain far apart. Nevertheless, for the people of Puerto Rico, we need to find a way to go forward. That being said, I just want to relate for the record some of the concerns that remain even after negotiations that we had, which have led to the compromise that is embodied in the amendment being brought forward by our chairman. First of all, I'm concerned that the word territory remains in the first option, which will be taken as an affront by those who support the Commonwealth option, either as it exists or as an enhanced Commonwealth. I had proposed a substitute without the word territory in it, but I was unable to have that accepted. It would have been my preference that territorial status, not be in the first option, because it's a word that, in my opinion, the majority of Puerto Ricans have never used to describe their status, and it has the potential to create confusion, especially given the fact that this country and the whole world has held for over 50 years that they are self-governing. Further, the amendment as constructed, while it has refrained from specifically naming the other options, which helps to move the process forward, it does not concede that a further enhanced Commonwealth could be considered for negotiation with the U.S. government, if that is what the people of Puerto Rico wanted to attempt to do. Third, the way the first vote is constructed, although it is obviously not the intent of the chairman, in my opinion, it does pit all of the other options against Commonwealth. So the independistas, the statehooders, the Free Association supporters can gang up against the one option that has received the plurality of the votes in prior referenda. While I will not oppose the chairman's substitute, I feel I must point out that what we may be setting up is another boycott of this process by those who support Commonwealth, and that does not serve the process or the people of Puerto Rico well. Finally, despite what we might say to divorce Puerto Rico from the rest of us, how we do move forward today can become a precedent for the other territories. And being the closest neighbor to Puerto Rico, a large portion of residents and my voters are of Puerto Rican descent who, like Congressman Serrano, Velasquez, and Gutierrez, take a real interest in the outcome and the process as well. Their position is reflected in mine. I had hoped that we could have had more time to work on a bill that we could have reached broader consensus on, something the leadership also suggested, that we should have worked out a compromise before this workup. That was not possible. And so it's my hope, and I am committed to this, that we can work together on a process going forward that can bring the people of Puerto Rico the product of consensus, one that supersedes party divisions, and that we can come together behind a process and options that give every Puerto Rican an equal chance to express their aspirations for Puerto Rico. I will be offering an amendment later to have a constitutional assembly convened after the first vote. It is my hope, though, that whether or not one or two is chosen, either could go to the assembly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
There's never been a state that we have admitted that has had a vote on it where there have been less than 70% of the people, over 70% of the people voting for it. In fact, most of the time, it's been well over 80%. The last two states that came in, Alaska, 83.47% voted in favor of statehood, and in Hawaii, 94.62% voted in favor of it. And I had noticed that in the votes that had occurred in Puerto Rico, that the statehood option had, I think, received 47 or 48%. And I became concerned, and I'm still concerned, that about admitting a state where half the people, or maybe over half the people, don't want to come in. Now, I've visited Puerto Rico. I love Puerto Rico, and all the people there have been so kind to me, and I became good friends through another committee with the current governor, Acevedo Vila. I also cannot express highly enough my admiration and respect for Congressman Fortino. But 10 years ago when we voted on this, 180 Republicans, 80% of the Republicans at the time, voted the way that I did because they had these same concerns. And I think we still have some of these concerns. I had sent over an amendment to require a 2/3 vote in favor of statehood before any state could, or before Puerto Rico could be admitted as a state. I will not submit that amendment at this time, but I still do have some of the same concerns that I had 10 years ago when we voted on this. And I thank you for yielding me this time, and I yield back. I'll say one other thing. The one other concern I have is this process seems to be designed to ensure that there is an outcome in favor of statehood. And I do have concerns about that too, because I'm not sure this is the fairest way that we could do things. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Duncan. Gentleman from American Samoa.
I think there's no question, Mr. Chairman, the implications are quite well taken. If you're a proponent of HR-900, you're pro-statehood. If you're a proponent of HR-1230, you're pro-Commonwealth. And that's the very thing that I think that what we're trying to do. And I must say, some members do support statehood, and I respect that. Same time, other members also support Commonwealth, and I respect that too. So what is our responsibility? We've already held 4 referendums in Puerto Rico, and in each instance, Commonwealth always came out the winner. Probably the last plebiscite that was taken in 1998, Mr. Chairman, if I recall, the results of that vote came out to 48% pro-Commonwealth, 46% pro-statehood, and 6% became pro-independistas. This is 98. I will submit, Mr. Chairman, that being a territory does not mean that one size fits all. There are implications. Some have interpreted the term territory as being colonialistic. Territories come in all different sizes and shapes. Some territories are organized but unincorporated. Some territories are unincorporated and unorganized, like my territory. Some territories are commonwealths, somewhat of a stage between statehood and that of independence. So there's a mixed bag. I recall years ago, right in the middle of a congressional hearing that we had in Puerto Rico, the conservative Pat Buchanan wrote an editorial commentary to say that if Puerto Rico has become a state tomorrow, it will be a welfare state. So we have all kinds of opinions expressed on what should be the status of Puerto Rico. And I think what we're trying to do here, give Puerto Rico the utmost option in terms of let them freely decide for themselves as to what they want to do. And I think this is what we're trying to accomplish here. And I do want to note the gentleman from Tennessee's comments. Puerto Rico being a state means 7 new members of Congress and 2 senators. However, that's going to be taken on the census or the next census coming up, see what the implications that mean. So there are some concerns with the bill HR-900, Mr. Chairman, and I do intend to introduce a couple of amendments along some of the things that I think hopefully will better the proposed bill. With that, I thank you.
The second plebiscite would have Puerto Rican voters elect whether they wanted to become a state, an independent republic, perhaps even an associated republic. However, that is not on the bill anymore if we accept your substitute bill. There have been some questions raised about statehood. Let me clarify some of the questions that have been raised. First of all, regarding seats, Congress in the past has increased the number of seats to bring in new states. There's nothing against us doing that again if that were the case. Secondly, the issue of cost. Well, certainly today, the cost to the federal treasury and U.S. taxpayers of a territory like Puerto Rico is over $15 billion, and we are not contributing to the nation's coffers. We want to contribute in more than one way, not just in the trenches and wars where we so valiantly go to, but also in more ways than one. And I want everyone to understand that. Finally, if I may clarify with my good friend from American Samoa, the last referendum in 1998, Commonwealth did not carry the day. None of the above did, because people were fed up with this process where each side will define their options in different ways. We need an honest broker, and I'm convinced that the greatest body in the history of the world, this U.S. Congress, is the best broker for that. Thank you again.
Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from Alaska, right
Mr.
now.
Chairman, I have to comment on two things. One is I want to compliment you and Mr. Serrano and Mr. Fortuno and everybody involved in this process. And I have to bring up the fact that doesn't bother me. I have lived through that. The opposition to Alaska being a state was, in fact, from the Eisenhower years that we were going to bring a whole bunch of Democrats into only one, but be one congressman, be a Democrat congressman. And what, just listen to me. And two Democrat senators. And that happened. But guess what? It didn't take long until the people of Alaska saw the wisdom, and we have two Republican senators and a Republican congressman and a Republican governor and a Republican I can go down. Now, having said that, the objection to Hawaii, I wish my friend was here, to becoming a state was they were going to bring a whole lot of Republicans into the Congress, two in fact, and two Republican senators. Now they're all Democrats. So I don't think we have to worry about what's going to happen the day that it was to become a state, because that'll be up to the decision of the people and the programs that are put forth by the equal parties. So that shouldn't even be part of the discussion. And I welcome more members to this Congress, regardless of party, if they would represent the people of Puerto Rico. So I had to put that in perspective, in the fact that nothing is what you think it's going to be. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Further discussion on the substitute? If not, then the chair will recognize amendments to the substitute. The gentlelady from the Virgin Islands is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment. I just wanted to say, for the record, that we did, in discussions leading up to today, present some amended language that would have been acceptable to the governor and his party, but in the negotiations, we were unable to reach agreement on those.
Without objection, the gentlelady's amendment is considered as read and printed into the record, and she may proceed for 5 minutes in support thereof.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My amendment would strike Section 2B of the pending Ray Hall Amendment, which calls on the President's Task Force on Puerto Rico in consultation with leaders of Puerto Rico to make recommendations to Congress within 6 months of the plebiscite mandated in Section 2A if a majority of validly cast ballots favor option 2. In place of this, my amendment has Congress recognizing the authority of Puerto Rico to either convene a constitutional convention or hold a subsequent plebiscite to determine the people's choice for Puerto Rico's future, political status, and relationship with the United States. As many know, and as I've said before, I'm a co-sponsor of HR-1230, which calls for Congress to recognize the authority of Puerto Rico to call a constitutional convention. I'm pleased that the chairman and the author of this bill, the distinguished gentleman from New York, Mrs. Serrano, were open to accepting this language. And I make no claim that this is a compromise agreed to by all political parties in Puerto Rico, but it is clearly a gracious effort by the chairman and Mr. Serrano to address concerns over any further involvement by the current president's task force and leaves any future expression between the people of Puerto Rico and this Congress. With that, Mr. Chairman, I submit my amendment to your amendment.
Is there further discussion on the amendment? Gentleman from Puerto Rico.
Yes. Madam Chair, as I mentioned before, it has been a true honor serving with you in the Insular Affairs Subcommittee in the last year. I appreciate the many hours that you and your staff spent with me and my staff in trying to work out a compromise. My reservations with regard to a constitutional convention are well known. As I have stated numerous times, I prefer that my constituents, through their direct votes, express their preference as to any status decision. Nevertheless, I believe that your amendment to Chairman Ray Hall's substitute bill constitutes a true compromise that we all can live with, and one that will substantially enhance the chances of this legislation being not only considered, but also passed by a wide margin in the full House. The important thing here is that after 109 years of stagnation, we're about to report out a bill that has an excellent chance of being enacted and that in itself is history in the making. I also have to say that your amendment is quite consistent with legislation that was unanimously approved, and let me restate the word unanimously, as this seldomly happens in Puerto Rico, by the Puerto Rico legislature back in March 2005, only to be vetoed by Governor Acevedo Villar. Mr. Chairman, at this time I would like to introduce a copy of this legislation for the record.
Yes.
Said bill, like your amendment, recognized Puerto Rico's authority to come up with a procedural mechanism to propose a status option to the United States Congress. And like in your amendment, the Puerto Rico legislature recognized that both a constitutional convention and a plebiscite would be options available to the local government. If I may add, I believe that the people of Puerto Rico have other options available as well. For example, we could request that Congress provide for a federally sanctioned plebiscite among constitutionally viable, permanent, non-territorial options. The Christensen Amendment, as I read it, would not preclude the people of Puerto Rico from choosing this or any other option available to them for that matter. Mr. Chairman, I would hope that you agree with me on this conclusion. I would welcome the opportunity to working with you on report language addressing the same. That being said, I want to thank you again, Madam Chair, for your leadership on this issue, and I look forward to working with you as we continue to move this legislation through the legislative process and to eventual enactment. Mr. Chairman, if I may, I would like to engage in a brief colloquy with you at this time to clarify some issues related to the amendment offered by the gentle lady of the Virgin Islands to your substitute amendment. First, I'd like to address the issue of the Constitutional Convention. My reading of the amendment is that Congress would recognize Puerto Rico's inherent authority to call a constitutional convention, but that this mere recognition does not, and I repeat, does not constitute a mandate on the government of Puerto Rico. Is that your understanding as well, Mr. Chairman?
Would the gentleman yield?
Yes.
The gentleman is correct. Yes, the language that you refer to is simply recognizes the government of Puerto Rico's authority to call a constitutional convention, and in no way constitutes a mandate that this is the only path that the island can follow.
The amendment also states that the purpose of the Constitutional Convention would be to propose to the people of Puerto Rico a self-determination option. As I see it, and in order to be consistent with your amendment in the nature of a substitute, such a self-determination option must be a constitutionally viable, permanent, non-territorial option. Otherwise, we would be rendering as meaningless the results of the plebiscite provided for in Section 2A of the substitute. Would you agree with this interpretation?
The gentleman would yield?
Yes.
Most certainly, as I see it, Section 2B is triggered only in the event that a majority of the voters in the plebiscite provided for in Section 2A were to choose option 2. That is, to pursue a constitutionally viable, permanent, non-territorial status. That being the case, it would be expected that the option proposed by the Constitutional Convention would have to be consistent with the electoral mandate of the majority of the voters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any further discussion? If not, the question is on the amendment offered. Yes, gentleman from California, Mr. Baca.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The goal here is to do what is best for Puerto Rico, and I know that a lot of us are very much concerned with what's going on, and hearing the statement, the original statement that was offered by Mr. Fortuno, I sort of like took offense in one sense to the statement that you made, because you indicated that the governor was lobbying in that strange Bedfellows. He has a responsibility to lobby on what he believes is right for Puerto Rico. And if he feels that it's opposite, then he should lobby on the opposite side. He has that right. And so I took offense to that form of a statement that was stated at the beginning, because any individual has a right to lobby in terms of what he or she believes. But I believe here it's a matter of giving Puerto Rico an opportunity to determine their own destiny, whether it's by choice or voting. And I have a question, Mr. Chairman, of either you and Ms. Christensen. One, will this amendment presented possibly express some of the concerns of colleagues who have expressed opposition to this legislation? Yes or no?
Would you yield? Would the gentleman yield?
Yes.
Well, it does bring in language that is pretty much taken right from HR 1230, and so it becomes a real compromise between the two, at least to that extent. This language is exactly what's in 1230, the other bill that was before the subcommittee.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Chair, can you elaborate a little bit more?
I would concur with what the subcommittee chair has said. She has accurately described it, responded to the question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from American Samoa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to ask the gentlelady from the Virgin Islands, our subcommittee chairman, if the dialogue that just transpired between the gentleman from Puerto Rico and Chairman Rahal is satisfactory to her in terms of the intent that she had made on the proposed amendment.
As I said in, I think it was my statement when the substitute amendment was proposed, it is my hope that either one should be able, any position that the people of Puerto Rico would opt for could go to a constitutional assembly and be included in, for consideration. It's also my understanding that even if it were enhanced Commonwealth, that would be a non-territorial status as explained by the governor. So my hope would be that whatever it is that the people of Puerto Rico would vote for in the majority would be able to go to an assembly for the plebiscite or whatever was decided by the institutions in Puerto Rico.
Would I further understand from the gentlelady's statement that the whole thrust of the gentlelady's amendment is to give the people of Puerto Rico an unfettered right, not being persuaded pro-statehood, pro-Commonwealth, pro-independence, but let the people of Puerto Rico decide ultimately their destination and future rather than by some manipulation of the system. And I'm not suggesting that HR-900 is manipulating the system, but am I to understand that the gentlelady's amendment really adds more to giving the people of Puerto Rico a fair option and not being one way, and I'm not an advocate one way.
It brings back in the possibility of having a constitutional assembly to further define what that the option that is chosen in the first instance.
And to the gentlelady, then you are satisfied with the chairman's understanding also of the proposed amendment and the gentleman from Puerto Rico's acceptance of the amendment.
And the amendment specifically speaks to option 2. I realize that, but I think we've all made a commitment to continue to work to reach a consensus that it's acceptable to everyone as we move forward from here.
Mr. Chairman, I want to commend the gentlelady from the Virgin Islands as subcommittee chairman, and I fully support her proposed amendment. Thank you.
Further discussion on the amendment. Gentleman from Idaho, Mr. Sally is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Sally. I just wanted to briefly touch upon what the gentleman from California brought up. I have an excellent working relationship with Mr. Baca, and I just wanted to clarify that certainly the governor has a right to lobby any way he wants. I have questioned in the past the use of public funds for that, and actually in today's Washington Post page, today's Washington Post, yes, section in the loop, and if I may introduce that into the record, it shows that no other jurisdiction actually has spent more money than Puerto Rico in lobbying in the last 6 months. Mr. Chairman, if we can introduce this.
Without objection, it would be made part of the record.
Having said that, however, I will state very clearly what I was referring to is that he comes up here and he paints himself as being in one end of the spectrum, politically speaking, but he's in bed with people in the other end of the spectrum. And that's all I was trying to say, Mr. Baca. Thank you again. I yield back.
Further discussion on the amendment? A gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Hope.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It seems that all of us want free and fair, unconstrained, undistorted determination by the people of their status. And it seems to me that a constitutional convention is much closer to that than that a constitutional convention approved by legislation through the processes within Puerto Rico is much closer to that than the presidential commission. And I commend the gentlelady for her work on this.
Further discussion on the amendment? If not, the question is on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from the Virgin Islands. The ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. Are there further amendments?
Mr. Chairman.
A gentleman from American Samoa.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not trying to be an obstructionist by proposing 10 amendments in the process, but I will withdraw Amendment 24, 25, 28, and 29, as noted in the members' packets. I would like to entertain Amendment number 31 first, so that to kind of give some sense of logic and follow up in terms of what I'm trying to do here. A member of this committee now for all these years. Amendment 31, Mr. Chairman, just simply states...
Just hold a minute. The amendment number 31 will be
taken first.
Offered in the record, considered as read, and printed in the record at this point. The gentleman is now recognized for 5 minutes in support.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The amendment is very simple. What it does, it gives the people of Puerto Rico to decide which of the three options, and then if there's no majority in any of the three options, then the two highest options will be put on the ballot. Now, this amendment obviously will have a lot of objections from those who promote or those who advocate very strongly independence option for the simple reason that that for the last four referendums, it's always been between statehood and Commonwealth. And I have the utmost respect for the good people of Puerto Rico, at least for those who advocate independence quite strongly. And knowingly that this option has never been agreed upon for all the years that I've been a member of this committee. The simple logic was, I thought that maybe after the '98 plebiscite, with 48% for Commonwealth and 46 for statehood and 6 remaining for independence, that the two highest options would then be taken on the final referendum plebiscite. But this was not acceptable. But I just wanted to cite that as a possible option, Mr. Chairman, and for the better understanding of our colleagues in the committee. With that, I withdraw this amendment.
Is there objection to the gentleman withdrawing his amendment?
Reserving my right to object.
Gentleman from California.
And obviously, we haven't been able to resolve this, nor have the people in Puerto Rico been able to resolve this. I think that this would be, and I understand, I'm not going to object to the gentleman's right to withdraw it, but I think this is a much cleaner and a much more straightforward way without trying to trick it up. And as this debate proceeds, there will be more and more efforts to trick up this debate before it's submitted to the people in Puerto Rico. And we'll be back here doing this again. So I want to thank the gentleman for at least offering this as a point of discussion. And I withdraw my reservation.
Gentleman from Hawaii.
Reserving the right to, and my own view, of course, is that colonial, the residue of colonial activity should be eliminated. But in any event, it needs to be concluded, and this doesn't do it. This just leaves it in limbo. And I agree also that we're going to come back to this. And I'm willing to go along again this time because I know you've worked hard to try and put this together to move it along right now. But I for one, if I'm still on this committee and am returned to office, and won't do it again.
Gentlelady from Virgin Islands recognized. Also
reserving my right to object. On the one hand, the gentleman from American Samoa's amendment does split the question, the first question, into the three options, as I would have originally preferred, without using the word territorial status, but just referring to the existing form of Commonwealth. But on the other hand, it would eliminate whichever receives the lowest vote. And I think that this is an ongoing process, and an evolving process, and I would not like to eliminate any option that was on the table, but it also takes it away from going to putting the authority in the institutions in Puerto Rico to decide whether to go have a plebiscite, whether to have a constitutional convention. So it changes that. So I'm not supportive.
Will the gentlelady yield?
Of the amendment in its entirety. Yes, I'll yield.
I think one of the issues, as I recall from the countless numbers of hearings that we've held in the committee for all these years about this very situation that we find ourselves in, and again, respecting all the different three basic options that the people of Puerto Rico have been confronted with. The problem here is that also, if you're pro-statehood, it's either statehood or independence, nothing in between. And the problem here is if we find ourselves having to choose between independence and statehood, then obviously it's going to be statehood. But the problem here is that we've already held 4 referendums, and the people of Puerto Rico have always opted for Commonwealth. So this is where the complications set in. If you're with one of these options, one of them is going to be at a disadvantage. And I'm just trying to figure where, with some sense of resolution, for final resolution, as the gentleman from California and from Hawaii have said, let's find an option where there will be a final decision and never will come back again to Congress to give another procedure or process on how the people of Puerto Rico should decide for themselves and their future. I thank the gentleman.
Reclaiming my time, I really appreciate the gentleman's intent here, and you do include free association as a form that may not have been given its due consideration in the past. But again, I think that to, at this point, eliminate any option closes the process at a point that's too early. This process could take years to evolve. It's not something that can be rushed, and I think at all times, every option, even those that receive the lowest number of votes, ought to be available for consideration. There's no guarantee that the option chosen would be accepted by the Congress of the United States, and the people of Puerto Rico would have to go back to one of the other 2 or 3 options. And I think they ought to be given the time and the opportunity to do that.
Would yield?
Yes.
On that last point, I mean, I think that's the problem. The more we trick up the process at the front end, the more noise the results come back to us, and then Congress starts all over again. And the cleaner the process is at the front end, the more likelihood the recommendation from Puerto Rico will be accepted by the Congress. And as we know, acceptance by the Congress is not a foregone conclusion, because a whole other series of issues then become raised in that debate. And we've been through them before. So, but when we send the message from Congress where we're playing with semantics and playing on people's emotions as we ask them to make these choices, whatever that choice is that comes back, then comes back with a lot of noise and accusations about the fairness, the openness, and the cleanliness of that decision. Having been through 3 of those, I thought we ought to try it another way this time. And I think the gentleman from American Samoa has it about right.
Gentleman, Puerto Rico.
Yes, very briefly, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I want to let my good friend from American Samoa know that certainly and Mr. Miller as well, actually, I would prefer that actually the second step that we take will be very clear and have spelled out the options that we have before us. The Senate has tried this, and actually 14 senators led by Senator Salazar and Martinez filed a bill, and immediately thereafter the governor came out against it, and it spelled out the different options. So we have been trying to reach a compromise here, and I will introduce, if I may, for the record, copy of page 7 of the San Juan Star, dated August 3rd, 2007, where he expressed his objections to this. And hopefully in the second round of this, once we have had this vote, we'll be able to indeed have the options spelled out and get right into it. So with that, I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection, the reference material will be made part of the record.
Thank you.
Further, is there further objection? Is there objection to the gentleman from Colorado is recognized?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And actually, I just have a question for the sponsor of the amendment. And the gentleman from American Samoa, my question is, I noticed that 029, which you did not offer, is very similar. But the implication, I think, is that should one of the 3 options in 029 not pass, it would just end right there. Is that, are you going to be offering 029, and is my reading of it correct? Or,
well, the gentleman,
and I will yield.
I have withdrawn Amendment 29 from consideration, so the intent of the amendment, Mr. Chairman, is to give the people of Puerto Rico an absolute mandate or the right to choose for themselves. And what this simply calls for is that give the people of Puerto Rico the 3 options. And if there's no majority, I mean, if there's no majority to any of the 3 options, then the 2 highest options will be taken separately in the form of a referendum. For example, let's say that it leaves only for statehood and Commonwealth. So then in one election, that's all. You just determine whether or not you want Commonwealth up or down. And then the following election will have the referendum on statehood. No options, no ifs or any other collateral statements or qualifications. Just simply a simple referendum. If after the first election no majority is received, then the next election, vote up or down whether they want to become a state. And if that doesn't work, then the next option, if they want to continue the Commonwealth status, that option is also provided, so that once and for all, we don't ever have to reconsider this issue again, hopefully.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I oppose this amendment. The amendment proposes 3 referenda over as long as 6 years to determine whether Puerto Ricans want one of 3 of their 4 status options: independent, statehood, and the current territorial status. In a recent independent professional poll, 74% of Puerto Rican Americans rated the question of Puerto Rico's status extremely or very important, versus 3% who said it isn't important, and 65% rated it urgent or extremely urgent, versus 13% who said it wasn't urgent or very urgent. The question is the fundamental issue of the territory, distracting attention from other issues and raising questions about the appropriate treatment of Puerto Rico under economic and social policies. All of Puerto Rico's leaders want a governing arrangement that is democratic at the national government level, which Puerto Rico does not have. A 6-year process to initially determine Puerto Rican views on their status options is far too long. I respectfully oppose the amendment. If we're going to have something, let's have something that's clean. But having amendments, votes every X number of years will certainly not allow us to actually, and especially if you're shifting the different options as you go along, will simply complicate things and confuse my constituents. So that's why I oppose this
Mr. Gentleman, yield?
Of course.
I was thinking that what 6 years, when for the last 50 years we still have not determined exactly the people of Puerto Rico's decision as to what their destiny and their future should be. And I thought that this might be a more clean way of determining, give the people of Puerto Rico a clear option. Don't put any conditions, don't put any
Yes, what I'm trying to say here is that if we're going to have a vote, let's have one vote. But let's not vote every so often and have different options in different years. It will just confuse everyone. Actually, I had to read through the amendment several times, and I don't want that to happen with such an important issue. I understand, and I appreciate your interest and goodwill, but certainly I believe it will confuse the voters in the process as well.
Mr. Chairman.
Is there,
I just
General Lady from Virgin Islands.
wanted to say that my objection to this amendment, while I understand the intent, is the same as it was to Amendment 31.
Is there further discussion on the gentleman's amendment? Does he wish to be recognized? Okay, gentleman from California.
Is there an estimation in terms of the cost it would be to Puerto Rico and the constituents to have 3 different type of separate votes during that period of time? And ultimately, who would be responsible for that? Will we or Puerto Rico and the constituents?
Will the gentleman yield?
Yes.
The simple fact is that it's going to be held at the election time every 2 years where there's a general election. So I don't think the expense is going to be that much, adding an added question to the ballot for the 2-year period. I'm sorry?
Will the gentleman yield?
Oh, the gentleman from California has the time.
I'll yield.
We don't have elections every 2 years. We have elections every 4 years, just to clarify that point.
Well, let's do it 4 years then. Still a lot better than having, for the last 60 years, we haven't made a determination. Or my good friend from Puerto Rico, since 1898, we still have not made a decision for Puerto Rico's future. And I agree.
Okay, thank you.
Is the gentleman from Puerto Rico suggesting that I withdraw my amendment?
Well, is there further discussion? If not, the question is, are you going to withdraw it or not?
Oh, no, let's...
Then the question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from American Samoa. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no? No. Opinion chair, the noes have it. Noes have it. The amendment is not accepted. Any other amendments? The gentleman from American Samoa is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I have amendment number 30.
The clerk will report the amendment. Without objection, it will be considered as read, printed in the record, and the gentleman from American Samoa is recognized for 5 minutes in support
I will say, Mr. Chairman, I'm really getting an education about options and future considerations, what others might consider. This proposed amendment, Mr. Chairman, is very simple. That in each given question of the options, could even, I say 3 basically. For statehood, that's it. You decide whether you become a state. Don't add Commonwealth, don't, any other option, either statehood, up or down. That the following election, you also have a referendum whether you become a Commonwealth. and then the third one would be independence. So that's basically the gist.
The chair is going to interrupt the gentleman to state a parliamentary point of order here, that this particular section has already been amended by the gentlelady from the Virgin Islands and therefore is not open for further amendment. So the gentleman's amendment's out of order.
All right, Mr. Chairman, so I take my amendment out of order and I withdraw the amendment because it's out of order. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The amendment is withdrawn. Are there further amendments? If not, the question is on the amendment in the nature of a substitute as amended. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed by no. The ayes have it, appear to have it. The ayes have it. And the amendment in the nature of a substitute as amended is accepted. The question is now in favor of reporting HR-900 as amended to the House of Representatives. All those in favor signify by saying aye. 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 Those opposed, no. Opinion chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. And the bill is favorably reported to the House of Representatives as amended. From Puerto Rico.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, under Committee Rule 5C, I give notice of my intention to file additional or dissenting views on the bill. Just consider it, and I ask unanimous consent that this notice be extended to all members of the committee.
Without objection, so ordered. By the way, the motion, without objection, the motion to reconsider final passage of the bill is laid on the table. It is the chair's intent to recess at the current time and then return to mining law reform.
Parks is meeting at 2 o'clock.
Why can't we have the committee room when we want it?
Okay, no.
It is the chair's intent to return to mining law reform before we have to manage bills on the floor of the House. It's not expected that we will manage these bills on the floor of the House until around 3:30 this afternoon. So we will have some time to further consider mining law reform, but we will recess for 15 minutes to allow the room to be cleared.
Te puedo decir que Puerto Rico tiene un cabildeo ínfimo comparado a los cerca de 10-11 millones que se hubo en el año 1997. El cabildeo de Puerto Rico mayormente no es para el tema del estatus, es para el tema de desarrollo económico, para el tema de educación. Así que yo me siento bien cómodo con lo que estamos haciendo y nuestros libros están abiertos, siendo auditados por el Contralor todos los días. Bienvenida sea cualquier investigación.
¿La administración Acevedo Vilá va a estar en contra de que este proyecto se apruebe en el Pleno de la Cámara?
Nosotros tenemos que evaluar este proyecto en este momento. Este proyecto está sumamente cambiado. Que sepa el pueblo de Puerto Rico que el HR-900 que se aprobó hoy no es el HR-900 que presentó la Casa Blanca ni que presentó el señor Fortuño.
Y el proceso no ha acabado. Hay espacio para enmendar.
Gracias.
Parece que hay un mal día para el movimiento estadista.
Y mal día para el movimiento colonialista también. El movimiento estadista y en sus dos facciones, la del Estado Libre Asociado Colonial y la de la estadidad. Yo creo que esto es un paso adelante importante porque el logro es eliminar la opción ilegítima de la colonia, de manera que los puertorriqueños entonces puedan, a través del método que escojamos, sea por votación o sea por una asamblea constituyente, considerar y escoger opciones no coloniales y no territoriales reconocidas por el derecho internacional. Así que creo que este es un paso importante, hay que llevarlo ahora a su final en la votación en el Pleno de la Cámara y luego en el Senado y a la firma del presidente. Pero yo creo que este es un paso importantísimo que no se había dado nunca antes y me parece que esto constituye un precedente histórico para el proceso de lo que va a culminar como la descolonización y la independencia de Puerto Rico. No podemos olvidar la importancia que tiene la América Latina como parte de la política exterior de Estados Unidos y que la América Latina unánimemente en un amplio espectro ideológico ha reclamado a Puerto Rico como parte de la América Latina y ha reclamado la descolonización de Puerto Rico y su independencia.
Muchas gracias.